beautiful things about working for Gallup is if you had a question, you wouldn't have to sit around arguing about it. You could say, well, let's go ask everybody. Which is a powerful conversation ender over dinner. Let's just go ask everybody. We'll come back tomorrow. I'll tell you the answer. So here was the question that we asked. This is back in 2000. Remember, here's the question we asked everybody. Which do you think will help you be most successful in life? However you define success. Building on your strengths or fixing your weaknesses? Yeah. We know you both got strengths and you've got weaknesses. And if you can't ignore one or the other, but if you're going to come down on one side or the other, which side would you come down on? And we didn't ask everybody. We asked representative samples of the populations of the US, the UK, France, Canada, China, and Japan. So it was a lot of people. If right now you're thinking that the whole focus of your life from the time you were very young has been to identify your strengths and contribute them, if you're thinking that, if you're sitting there right now thinking that, you'd been a minority in every single country Gallup studied. Turns out the United States is the most strengths-focused nation in the world. This is back in 2000. Back in 2000, this was the percentage of people, the blue bar was the percentage of people who said, fixing my weaknesses, and the gold bar, people who said building on my strengths. 41% of people in America in 2000 said leverage my strengths. 59% of people said fixing my weaknesses. In Britain, where I'm from, that gold bar, 38% of people would bet their career, their success, their contribution, their service, their significance on leveraging their strengths. 38%. Canada, 38%. France? Well, who cares about France? That was a joke. That's a little something I flatter myself to call English humor. Some of you may not be familiar with English humor. Some of you may think it's a contradiction in terms. Like English cuisine. But it does exist. It does exist, seriously. If I use it again, if you're listening along and you're thinking, well, was that supposed to be funny? Was it not supposed to be funny? If the hand goes up, if I raise my hand like this, it was hysterical. Okay? Just get the ground rules set. All right? So France, 35% of people said strengths, all the way down to the two least strengths-focused nations in the world, Japan and China. Japan and China, that gold bar in Japan and China is 24%. So 24% of people in those countries would bet their career, their success, their contribution, their service on leveraging their strengths. So, with all apologies to Madonna, it appears we live in a remedial world, right? We live in a world that is fascinated by weaknesses and tends to take strengths for granted. Everywhere you look, we seem to think that excellence, whatever that is just the opposite of failure. If you want to understand excellence, study failure. So, in order to learn about health, we study disease. In order to learn about joy and meaning and fulfillment and wisdom, we study depressed people. In order to learn about, seriously, how to engage our employees, we study the disengaged employees. In order to learn about great marriage, we study divorce. Everywhere you look, we seem to think that good is just the opposite of bad. If you want to get good, study bad and invert it. We're wrong. You study bad and invert it, you get not bad. Right? And that's just different than good or great. I mean, if you study, let's say you studied a bunch of divorced people. You know what you'd find? If you study divorced people, or people that are really unhappily married, let's just leave it at that. Study people that are really unhappily married, you find that unhappily married people argue a lot. I know. Shocking, but it's true. It's true. Write this down. No one's writing this down. Write this down. But the strange thing is you study really happily married people and you find they argue just as much. The difference between a great marriage and a not-so-great marriage is what goes on in the space between the arguments. My point is, whatever that is, and I don't know what that is. If my wife were here, she certainly would say I don't know exactly what that is because I'm no expert on marriage. My point is simply that if you wanted to learn about what makes an excellent marriage, you'd learn nothing about it from studying the rotten ones. You only learn about excellence from studying excellence. Well, as some of you know, and some of you have been on this train with me and with others for a while. And in fact, I wrote that book, Now Discover Your Strengths, sort of to fight against this idea that we ought to study failure to learn about excellence, and instead we should study strengths and success to learn about them. And I wrote the first line of the book, of the Now Discover Your Strengths book, the one that was written 7 years ago now, was one of those lines that you write. As a writer, you write it for you. It's sort of to get started. And I wrote this first line for me, sort of to get me going. I thought it would get cut out, but it wasn't cut out. It's still there. The first line of the book was, we wrote this book to start a strengths revolution. Well, you know, it's been 7 years now since that book came out, and all kinds of changes have occurred. You've probably seen some of those changes. Positive psychology. Who's familiar with positive psychology? Some of you maybe. A whole new movement in psychology. Martin Seligman began it. He was the past president of the American Psychological Association. He famously said, psychology's got it all wrong. We've got 40,000 studies on depression and less than 400 on joy. It's not that we shouldn't study depression, it's just that we ought to learn about joy and we ought to study it. A whole new movement in psychology has begun called positive psychology. And to know how powerful it is today, know this: the most popular elective class of any class on any subject at Harvard is an introduction to positive psychology. The United Nations used to characterize nations according to their vulnerabilities. Today it's changed so that today the United Nations characterizes countries according to their strengths. If your child happens to break the law in this country, they'll now be given a strengths assessment for juvenile justice, where they'll be asked strengths-based questions like, have you made any good changes in the past? If you made any changes today, who'd be the first person to notice those changes? You look around the world, you see all kinds of signs of change. If your family's in trouble and you go to family therapy in Australia or New Zealand, they'll take a strengths-based approach to helping you fix your family by figuring out, well, let's just start with what strengths do you have as a family? All the way around. I mean, if you Google the word strengths-based back in 2000, you know how many hits you got? If you Google it back in 2000, you got none. You know why? Google didn't exist back then.